There's a massive explosion. Body parts are blown everywhere. Dozens of people are dead. Dozens more lay covered in the rubble. Hands break through the surface, begging for help. There's smoke, there's debris, there's death all around. And this is before our story even gets started. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Stranger Than Fiction podcast. I'm your host, Rashad Freeman. Let's get to it. This story takes place in 2012 in Norway on an island in Lake Tyri. But before we even get there, we have to talk about the events that led up to this. This all starts with a man named Anders Breivik, a 32-year-old far-right extremist, and for lack of a better term, a weirdo. I mean, a complete, just straight up nut job. He was said to have been sexualized by his mom at a very young age, who went from words of affection bordering on romantic to telling him he should kill himself. His childhood is marred by a mother that didn't want him, multiple run-ins with social services, and psych evaluations. At one point, his mom asked potential foster parents if the dad could show Anders his penis because he didn't have a father figure in his life. Just very weird stuff. As an adult, he routinely slept in the same bed with his mother and bought her sex toys as a gift. He was not a normal guy. So overall, just a very strange upbringing and a propensity to be what I would call just weird AF. Now, when Anders was 20 years old, he joined something called the Progress Party, which was an anti-immigration party in Norway. Anders feared what he called multicultural drift and thought Norwegians risked becoming the minority in their own country. He blamed the Labour Party for the problems with immigration in Norway, as they were the ruling party at that time, and he saw it as his duty to do something about it. So Anders set out to make his mark on Norway and change the direction the country was heading in. And he planned to do this with acts of extreme violence. So in April of 2011, Anders announced to his friends that he planned on moving out of his mother's house and becoming a farmer. And his friends were happy for him because he was finally starting to show some direction with his life and coming out of what they thought was a period of depression. Earlier, he'd started wearing makeup. He'd had a nose job done. After someone had accused him of having an Arab-looking nose, he'd resorted to playing video games all day and talking anyone's ear off that would listen about Muslims seizing power in Norway. He'd also started writing a book about the Islamification of Europe. So to his friends, Anders wanting to become a farmer was great. He also told his friends he was no longer drinking, he was working out and taking anabolic steroids, and to them it seemed like he was finally starting to turn his life around. But Anders actually had no intentions of becoming a farmer. This was all part of a multi-year plan that Anders had been working on to save Norway and to save Europe from what he described as the influence of Islam. And Anders took this very seriously. He meticulously planned everything with painstaking detail. So instead of farming, Anders used the cover to access the enormous amounts of raw materials he needed to make a fertilizer bomb. And with the help of a few books and the internet, he did just that. He was at this farm wearing chemical warfare suits and grinding up ammonium nitrate pills. When he wasn't pretending to be a chemist, he was off carrying 70-pound rucksacks to build up his strength for what he saw as the most important mission of his life. So after years of planning and preparation, on July 22nd, 2011, he was finally ready. First, Anders sends this 1,500-page manifesto called 2083, a European Declaration of Independence, to over 1,000 email addresses, including politicians and journalists. He then drives to Oslo in a rented white van, packed with a 1-ton fertilizer bomb that he made at his farm. He drives to the executive government quarter and parks next to the office of the prime minister. He dons a police uniform he'd bought on the internet, places a sewage company sign in the window of the van, and then walks away. And he's actually caught on camera walking away from the building, wearing his police uniform with riot gear and carrying a pistol, which, if you don't know much about Norway, police don't usually carry weapons there, so that was already strange. Less than 10 minutes later, the bomb explodes. It is a massive explosion, sending debris in all directions. It causes catastrophic destruction and chaos, ultimately killing 8 people and injuring more than 209 others. It could have been much worse, but a lot of people were actually not in the office that day. But Anders is just getting started. You see, the first attack was against the Labour Party, but just attacking government employees wouldn't bring about the change that Anders wanted. He needed to send a message. He needed Norway to know that he was serious and force them to listen. And this is where Utøya Island comes into play. You see, on this island, they've hosted a teen camp for kids 14 to 20 for the last 61 years. It's a youth group for the Workers' League, and it's organized by AUF. It's essentially the youth wing of the ruling Labour Party. And this is basically a summer camp on this heart-shaped island in the middle of a lake. And it's really like your typical summer camp. There's people in tents, there's kids running around, getting into all sorts of stuff. It's exactly what you would imagine with a bunch of teenagers hanging out in the woods. The island is like 25, 26 acres, so not that big. And it's not this beach-like setting either. Most of the island is punctuated with these jagged cliffs that just fall off into the water. Now, many government officials have kids that actually attend this camp. And this is something they all looked forward to. It was a pretty big deal. So after parking the van, Anders gets into his getaway car that's on another street. And he drives straight to the ferry that is headed for Utøya Island. Meanwhile, some of the kids at the camp have heard about the bombing in Oslo. Parents are calling their kids are calling their parents, and there's a little bit of panic in what is usually a pretty chill day. So the counselors began to gather the campers in the cafeteria. But it's a summer camp, so you've got kids all over the place, and they're slowly trickling in. Campers are confused, they're wondering what's going on, why are they bringing them all into the cafeteria? And some of the kids that have already spoken with their parents are telling them, well, we think it's about the bombing in Oslo. Once the majority of them get into the cafeteria, the counselors tell them what is going on, and they tell them they're canceling all of the other activities for the day while they await to hear more from the mainland. But they reassure all the kids that they are safe, that they are in fact at the safest place they could be. I mean, there were obvious terror attacks going on in Oslo, and being on a remote island away from all of it seems perfect. But what they don't know is that Anders has left Oslo and is headed to the island to continue his attack. So Anders arrives at the ferry dressed in his police uniform, and he demands they take him to the island immediately. He tells them this is an order from the police department. He has to get there, he has to secure the island, and they need to hurry up. He's talking about the attack in Oslo and how the city is going into full lockdown mode, and he keeps stressing on how the island has to be contained. Now, a lot of what he was saying doesn't make sense when you actually sit down and think about it. Like, they wouldn't send a lone officer to contain an entire island, but in the heat of the moment, you don't question things like that. The guy is obviously a police officer, and everyone is panicking, so they think, yeah, let's get him to the island. So the ferry comes to pick him up, and the captain is complaining, saying he wasn't notified or whatever. But it's a tense situation, and no one is really going to try to stop the police while they figure it out. Not to mention, the first attack was at the Labour Party government building, and on the island is the Youth Labour Party summer camp. So it stands to reason they may be a risk as well. Little did the captain know that he was actually taking the fox to the hen house. So Anders boards the ferry with a rifle and a suitcase full of ammunition, and the ferry takes off heading for Utøya Island. Once they arrive at the island, Anders steps off the boat and is greeted by an off-duty cop that is doing security there, and the coordinator for camp activities, a woman named Monica. So as they are walking with him toward the camp, they are making small talk, like trying to get to know each other or whatever. The off-duty cop is asking Anders questions about where he's stationed and things like that, and he's wondering why they sent Anders alone. And this starts to make Anders feel nervous. It sounds a little bit more probing than small talk. And then the cop asks Anders if he knows someone named Dorn. According to the cop, it's someone that works at the same police department as Anders. Anders freezes. He doesn't know how to answer. Is this a fake person that doesn't even exist? Or is this someone that everyone that works there knows? Now, Anders is walking slightly behind the cop and Monica as they're heading down to the camp. And they are not far at this point. You can see the campgrounds and tents and sleeping bags everywhere. And even some of the kids are out up ahead. Anders cannot afford to have his cover blown this close. He knows this could be a trick question, so right then and there he decides it's go time. He raises his pistol, and as he does, Monica turns around and screams. But Anders shoots the off-duty cop in the back, then turns the gun and shoots Monica. They both fall to the ground, and then Anders walks up on both of them and executes them. The gunshots rang out across the island, and when Anders looks up, the ferry captain, who happens to be Monica's husband, is standing down the trail with a look of shock and horror covering his face. They both stare at each other for a minute. Then the captain screams out to anyone within earshot, "Run for your life." All hell breaks loose. People are running in every direction. They're screaming, they're shouting. But Anders is like one of those killers in a scary movie. He just methodically and almost casually walks after them, hunting each one of them down. The kids back in the cafeteria hear the gunshots, but at first they have no idea what they are. Maybe they're fireworks, who knows? But then the crowd of kids that were outside come running by. And if you've ever been around a large crowd, when somebody starts running, everyone starts running. And that's exactly what happens here. Nobody's asking questions. They see terrified campers running for their lives and they join them. But it's just complete madness. I mean, there's tents and bags and shoes all over the ground. Kids are tripping and falling everywhere. Then there's dead bodies on the ground. The kids, the counselors, everyone is scrambling for their lives as Anders stalks them down.
I could see people running and him shooting, and I could see 3 people fall just right here.
Then the first call to the emergency line comes in. One of the teens begging for help. We're on Utøya Island. There's a police officer killing everyone. Then the line goes dead. The operator initially thinks it's a prank call, which is something that happens, especially considering the attack earlier in Oslo. But seconds later, another call comes in. Then another, and all the phones are just ringing off the hook. Now, if you don't know, Norway does not have a big gun culture. It's not like the US. So some of these kids would see Anders with this gun and they would just freeze. And he'd just take his time, line up his shot, and kill them where they stood. Others would collapse on the floor, covering their face and their head, but that wouldn't stop him. And with this suitcase of ammo and no one else on the island having a weapon, Anders is just unloading. Some of his victims he shoots up to 10 times. Anders would shoot into a crowd, and some of the kids would either fall out of fear or trying to play dead, but Anders would just slowly walk over and continue shooting at the bodies as they lay there. So Anders is literally hunting these kids down. They are trapped on an island and there's no one there to save them. The only thing limiting Anders' destruction at the time is the amount of bullets he brought, and he has plenty. And he's just walking around shooting people and cheering himself on for what he would think are good shots. Now, at some point, he's been on there for a little bit, and a lot of the kids have kind of dispersed and are out and about hiding, and he gets sick and tired of like trying to find them in their different hiding spots. So he starts to lure them out. Remember, most of the people that have actually seen Anders are already dead. So the survivors can hear the gunshots, but they have no clue where they're coming from or who's doing the shooting. So he calls out to the kids, tells them he's with the police and that the shooter's been apprehended. He tells them how it's safe to come out and they're gonna start evacuating soon and that the ferry's on the way. The kids are obviously wary, but after a few calls, some start poking their heads out and coming out of hiding so they can be rescued. They see him in his police uniform and they assume they're safe. And Anders would gather them all together, and once he had a big enough crowd, he'd start shooting them all over again. At this point, kids are doing anything they can to get away. Some are just jumping right off the cliffs into the water. Some are trying to swim away. Some kids are just trying to hide in the water, but Anders just continues to just casually hunt them down. At one point, he walks to the edge of the water and screams after the kids that have jumped in, "I'm gonna kill you all." And then he opens fire.
So we're running and get to this cliff area. And me and my brother is the first one to arrive there. And we hear the shots coming closer and closer and closer. It was a cliff like this, but me and my brother was there. And it was an overhang, but then again you can stand there and just shoot down in the cliff. And he did. And I don't remember where I was hit the first time or the second time. But I remember being hit and falling down to the water, you know.
Now, eventually, the elite police teams make it to the island, but Anders has been at it for 72 minutes when they get there, and it's still craziness everywhere. Most survivors don't even know who was doing the shooting. They're afraid to talk to anyone. They're afraid to come out of hiding. So police are having a hard time figuring things out and trying to make sense of all the carnage they see. Like, how can all these dead bodies be everywhere and no one knows what's going on? But when Anders sees the police, he immediately surrenders without incident, saying he had no intention of harming the police, which seems kind of weird until you realize Anders thought what he was doing was just, and the police were his brothers in arms. They were just responsible for upholding the law. His issue was with the immigrants and those that supported immigration. So Anders is taken into custody. Then the police began to canvass the island. They sent divers into the water. They have rescue helicopters going around. Even some of the people that live near the island have taken their own private boats out and are picking up kids out of the water, along with the numerous dead bodies that are just floating in the lake. As far as Anders goes, He has some demands. For starters, during his assault, he actually called the police several times. He tried to turn himself in once he'd executed enough people. And yes, he called these executions, not murders. He wanted to make sure he was captured alive. He did not want to be killed. He also did not want to be placed in a prison with Muslims. He even took photos of himself that he wanted used in connection with his attack, and he didn't want any new photos taken. So in the 72 minutes that Anders was on Utøya Island, he killed 69 people, mostly teens, and seriously injured another 30. Combined with his attack earlier in Oslo, the death toll was 77 people and 239 injured, making it the deadliest attack in Norway since World War II. Anders acknowledged that he was responsible for both attacks, but held that his actions were atrocious but necessary. Before trial, he underwent examination by a court-appointed forensic psychiatrist and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And they concluded that he'd been psychotic at the time of the attack and was therefore criminally insane. I immediately take issue with that because he planned this for more than a year. This is just who Anders was. Anders himself also took issue with the diagnosis. He felt like it insulted him. This initially led to another round of examinations, and this time he was found to be sane. He was indicted on terrorism charges, although there was plenty of discussion on what he should actually be charged with. And several times they brought up high treason and crimes against humanity. Anders pled not guilty and was quoted as saying he did not recognize the justice system. In August, he was found guilty and sentenced to preventive detention, which is a 21-year sentence, which can be repeatedly extended for 5 years as long as he's considered a threat to society. This was the maximum sentence allowed by Norwegian law and the closest thing they had to life imprisonment. In the aftermath of all of this, numerous survivors would tell their stories and share memories of loved ones lost. And you have to think about the sheer terror these teens experienced. They were trapped on an island with nowhere to go and no one to save them while a madman hunted them down. Netflix made a movie about this called July 22nd. The internet is full of firsthand accounts and documentaries, and there are numerous books about the events. But this is my little rendition of what went on and just how crazy people can be. This is the Stranger Than Fiction podcast. Until next time.